Okay, welcome everyone. It's wonderful to have you here on the second day of the summit. For those who didn't attend or couldn't attend yesterday, I'm James Waller. I'm the inaugural Dodd Chair in Human Rights Practice here at the University of Connecticut, Director of the Dodd Human Rights Impact Programs, and a professor in Literature, Cultures, Languages, and Human Rights here. It's my pleasure on behalf of my colleagues at Gladstein Family Human Rights Institute to welcome you to day 2 of our inaugural Human Rights Summit at the Dodd Center for Human Rights. Yesterday, if you were here with us, we focused on issues related to global democracy with a specific case study early in the morning on Ukraine, and then by the end of the day, moving to other discussions around the world where countries and regions are under threat because democracy is in retreat. Today, on the second day of the summit, we bring our attention much closer to home, both here to the U.S. and later this afternoon to our campus here at the University of Connecticut. We know that one of the threats to democracy is a hidden history. The dark silences that we hide in our history, the pages of our past that we refuse to confront. So it's important that we start today with that recognition that any understanding of the story of the United States starts with the attempted extermination of one people, the Indigenous people who lived here before us, and the importation and enslavement of another people, Africans who were brought here for economic benefit. Any story of who we came to be and the struggles we have with democracy today, we recognize starts with those basic historical realities. With that in mind, we'd like to begin today by acknowledging the land on which we gather is the territory of the Eastern Pequot, Golden Hill Pagosset, Lenape, Mashantucket Pequot, Mohegan, Nipmuc, and Schaghticoke peoples, people who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. We thank them for their strength and resilience in protecting this land, and we aspire to uphold our responsibilities according to their example. As we mentioned yesterday, a commitment to human rights that we share, and you're all here because you share that commitment, should be embodied in how we treat each other, how we interact with each other, how we discuss with each other, and particularly how we disagree with each other. Yesterday, everyone who attended did a wonderful job of embodying that spirit and respect of human rights, and we certainly hope and expect for the same today, because today's contentious issues, as we said, cut much closer to home than many of the issues we talked about yesterday. So we're very pleased to start the day with our opening panel on threats to U.S. democracy. This is our largest panel of the summit, and I think it's going to be one of our most remarkable panels of the summit. As you'll hear in a few moments with the introductions, we have some incredible people who have been willing to join us for this important discussion. The chair moderator of this panel is Dr. Shareen Hertel, who is the Wiktor Osiatyński Chair of Human Rights and Professor of Political Science here at the University of Connecticut. Shareen's expertise is in transnational human rights advocacy with a particular focus on labor and economic rights. One of the things we're very proud of here, one of the many things we're proud of at the Dodd Center, is the exceptional work we're able to do in the space of business and human rights. We do a lot of that work because of Shareen's leadership and her dedication. So it's my pleasure to introduce Shareen to you and turn it over to her now for the introduction of the panel. Please join me in welcoming her.
Thank you. And I see a lot of people entering, so please come join us. I see many of my own students. Thank you for being here, colleagues and friends, community members. It is a joy and it is a privilege to moderate this panel today on U.S. democracy under assault. And I thank Jim for the intentionality and the clarity with which he's opened this panel. This is a panel about all of us who live here in the United States, whether citizens or non. And it's a panel about how we choose to live together and the way we choose to reckon with the unfinished business of human rights in our own country. I'm not going to take time away setting up the panel any further or introducing myself other than to say I'm Shareen Hertel and really happy to be here. And I'm going to note to you the two questions that are going to animate our discussion as a collective before I introduce our panelists. Our panelists were invited to think on two issues. What do you see as the most significant challenges to democracy in the US? And how can we better support democracy and democratic institutions in our country? So those are the questions that have been shared with the panelists, and we're eagerly awaiting their thoughts on these really challenging issues. I want to introduce them from the end of the table on up to my immediate seat here. Kim Sanders, at the very end, is our Chief Operating Officer of Everyday Democracy based right in Hartford. For over 3 decades, her organization has provided technical assistance to individuals and groups working to build multiracial democracy. Kim is integral to that work. She comes to it with more than 20 years of addressing issues related to poverty and social justice through the work of Planned Parenthood of Greater New York. Kerri Malloy, our next speaker, is Assistant Professor of Native American and Indigenous Studies at San Jose State University. Dr. Malloy is an enrolled member of the Yurok Nation and of Yurok descent and explores the potential obstacles and applications of transitional justice in societies that have experienced genocide or mass atrocity events. A gifted scholar and teacher, he has co-authored a book manuscript and many other publications, but I want to note to you his forthcoming book from Prager entitled The Politics of Defining Genocide, International Relations, Denialism, and Prevention. Next, we have Jamil Dakwar, who is the director of the American Civil Liberties Union's Human Rights Program and an adjunct lecturer at New York University and Hunter College, both in New York City. Mr. Dakwar leads a team of lawyers and advocates who use the human rights framework to complement existing ACLU legal and legislative advocacy, primarily focusing on promoting racial and economic justice and ending mass incarceration, police violence, and extreme sentencing. Prior to his work with the ACLU, he worked with Human Rights Watch. Next, we have Nicole Safar, who is the executive director of Law Forward. Nicole comes to this work following more than a decade and a half of work in reproductive freedom and public health, and she believes we cannot have a healthy democracy without racial justice and bodily autonomy. She also stresses the importance of the fight for free and fair elections and other democratic practices that make political equality possible. And finally, immediately here, we have Dunn, who is a U.S. Capitol Police officer and the author of the book Standing My Ground, A Capitol Police Officer's Fight for Accountability and Good Trouble after January 6th. And Good Trouble we call out in the memory of one of his mentors, John Lewis. As his publisher, Hachette Books writes of this book, Dunn's ongoing story is a witness to the willingness to meaningfully engage with the media, lawmakers, and the public and provide a backdrop for examining the political, racial divides in this country. So each of our speakers is going to take those two questions: what do you see as the most significant challenges to democracy, and how can we better support democracy and democratic institutions in this country? And they'll speak for 10 minutes, and then after each of them has spoken, I'll pose a group question and follow-up that I'll allow each of them to riff off of, and then we'll take the discussion with the audience from 10:25 to 45. So we're really mindful of time, but incredibly privileged to have each of these people here. So join me in welcoming them all.
Good morning. So I will start by saying that I don't believe the myth that we are a polarized nation. A small but influential group of extremists who have pushed for authoritarian control against basic democratic principles as well as personal freedoms. We see this in challenges to voting rights, such as restrictive voter ID laws or the Georgia ban on individuals handing out water to voters waiting in line. These actions undermine the fundamental right to vote. Now, the chaos following the 2021 insurrection at the Capitol revealed how deeply divided and partisan our government has become. Thank you. Making it difficult to make progress on important issues. Most recently, we've seen this with the House of Representatives' inability to do the people's work because they were unable to select a speaker. Now, the reality is public opinion on various issues often diverges from policy decisions. For example, a Gallup poll in 2023 showed that 85% of Americans believe that abortion should be legal in all or most cases, yet political decisions on this issue remains contentious. A May 2023 poll by the Kaiser Family Foundation and the Washington Post shows that a substantial number of Americans support laws that prohibit discrimination against transgender individuals, ranging from 65% of Americans believing that supporting these laws in the military, and 74% of Americans supporting laws that bar discrimination in housing. However, in 2023, 583 anti-trans bills were introduced in 49 states across America. And finally, a CNN poll, also in May of this year, showed that 64% of Americans believe that we need stricter gun control laws. However, once again, sadly, we are mourning the loss of lives from another mass shooting. So here's what I do believe. The exchange of ideas and expression of values through robust, purpose-driven dialogue is one of the most effective self-governing democratic tools. So why dialogues? Authoritarianism and racial supremacy aren't just threats to U.S. democracy. They pose a significant risk to human rights worldwide. And in this context, diverse and open dialogues become a powerful tool to counter these threats. Dialogue has a unique ability to bring people together despite their differences. It's a potent strategy for finding common ground on civic issues by fostering democratic change through understanding and compromise. And as we know, many people in our government believe compromise is a bad word. Dialogue is based on factual information and diverse viewpoints that builds understanding and a solid foundation for civic problem solving. It promotes inclusivity and justice, avoiding the imposition of one single point of view, which often leads to ongoing conflict and division. Now, local change is essential is an essential catalyst for democracy. While national policy changes can take years or even decades, local dialogue creates more expedient pathways for change. Organizations like mine, Everyday Democracy, has adopted this powerful tool. Consider this: community-led solutions are more achievable at the local level, where neighbors can work together to build a multiracial democracy committed to equity and justice. To be clear, dialogue isn't just about talking. Through organizing and building diverse coalitions, dialogue deepens relationships and creates pathways to problem solving. It is through dialogue that we can build bridges, even in the most diverse communities. But let's not stop at conversations, right? Local dialogue should be followed by concrete action planning, which may include community building projects, social action activities, and institutional and policy changes. Now, our model, which is called Dialogue to Change, has been in use for more than 30 years. It encourages place-based engagement for community-led solutions. The model spurs community dialogues by providing training, coaching, and tools for local engagement. Dialogue to Change embeds racial equity and power analysis in all aspects. It acknowledges systems of oppression and that shape both dialogue and also the issues that communities are working to address. Facilitation practices are multi-partial and trauma-informed to avoid replicating harm that often occurs in communities. Now, this ensures that the dialogue process is fair and inclusive, with an understanding that there is no quick fixes. Groups working with Everyday Democracy must commit to long-term equitable processes. This process is grounded in factual information about power and marginalization. The dialogue to process leads to sustainable solutions to local concerns. Now, to be clear, the challenges to U.S. democracy are real, but they're not insurmountable. Dialogue at both the local and national levels can be a powerful tool in overcoming these challenges. By engaging in diverse, factual, and inclusive conversations, we can build understanding and common ground and take concrete steps to a more equitable and just democracy. Steps towards organizations like Everyday Democracy and our Dialogue to Change model provides a framework to guide us on this path towards a stronger and healthier democracy for all. It is our collective responsibility to ensure democracy thrives, and it is with open and honest dialogue.
Ayakui, hello. Skianakoi, good morning. The questions that we've been asked to address have been stuck in my head since I got the email, and I've been pondering how to respond to them. Because I can make a list that would fill a notebook of what threats to democracy are. But what kept coming back to me as I thought about these was the individual experience of democracy. We live in a curated world. Your news feeds are curated based on an algorithm. Your interaction on social media is curated. You curate your experience day to day so that it's a very individual experience. The collective experience of democracy has sort of faded into the past. You have opinions, you have beliefs, you have viewpoints. And if we notice what's happening right now in this country, around the world, is my opinions are more important than yours. My facts are better facts than yours. The collective component of that idea of democracy is in trouble. And I've been trying to figure out how to express that. I've wrestled with it because where do you begin with that? At what point did that start to happen? And the only thing I could come back to is something that happened in 1985. And as I tell my students, just bear with me. I'm going to meander here for a little bit. Hey, I'm in the front of the room. I got control. That's the way it works. In 1985, the United States Congress was asked to settle a dispute. There were two tribes in Northern California, the Hupa and the Yurok. I am Yurok. My family is Yurok. I come from the village of Witchpeck at the confluence of the Klamath and Trinity rivers. I'm also Karuk. I come from up the river. The Congress was asked to intervene, not because the two tribes were arguing with each other, but because there was a question over who had control over a joint reservation, over the place that they were confined to in order to give up the land of the area, mostly to timber companies. And the Congress was asked to settle this dispute. My tribe, since time immemorial, had not been what we would call organized. We operate and still try to at a familial level. We have individual families that govern each other. We work together. As a collective, we share a language. We share a belief system. We recognize that our responsibility that we were given is an awesome one, because we are world renewal people. Our job, for whatever reason, is to maintain this entire world in balance for every living person and thing. We are not permitted to enter ceremony, church, synagogue, mosque, unless we can sit down next to the person that we dislike the most in the world and have nothing but positive thoughts about them. That's a high bar. That's a really high bar, but that's what we have to do. Because we have to care just as much about the person that has harmed us as we do about ourselves. The dispute was over timber revenues, and the fact that UROC had not adopted a democratic form that the United States understood. The United States understands branches of government. It understands one person to speak for everybody. It has its own thing, and that's okay. It's worked for 200 and some odd years. We'll leave it alone for right now. But what had lasted for millennia, I know, we'll see how it goes. It's okay. I haven't seen the news today, so it could have all gone to hell. Who knows? But what had lasted for a millennia was being interfered with. And the United States Congress in 1985 passed the Hoopa-Yurok Settlement Act. And it forced the Yurok tribe to organize into something it had never been. It was never intended to be. We had to form an elected government. We hadn't had that. Yes, we had existed as citizens of the United States because in 1924, Congress said, oh, we need to do something with these people. We tried to kill them. We didn't succeed. So now we're going to make them citizens. So we understood how U.S. democracy worked. And we were then put in a position where we had to somehow maintain who we are. Notice I said are, not were. We are. We have not gone anywhere. We had to somehow maintain who we are within a structure that was foreign to us. We organized. There were fights. Families were divided. Two tribes emerged from that, the Hoopa, who had been organized and were reaffirmed under the act. They had existed in an organized way for several decades, so for them it was a very easy transition. For Yurok, it didn't go easily. It has not gone easily. Because everything has become very personal. Our interaction with democracy has forced us to have to make choices of when we hold to the way we've always done things, to the way in which the United States expects us to do that. We have leaders who are elected who may not actually be the leaders that we have traditionally held and had. I am not Yurok because I come from Witchbeck. I am not Yurok because my mother is Yurok. I am Yurok because the United States Congress made me Yurok. They did not give me a choice to decide for myself if I were going to join and be a part of the Karuk tribe, which is where my maternal grandmother's family is from, or if I wanted to be with my grandfather, my mom's dad. I didn't get the choice because I was under 18 and Congress in its wisdom said if you are born before this date, you're going to go this way. If you're born after this date, this is what's going to happen. I didn't get a choice. Think about how that operates for all of us existing in a democracy. We're told that we have the right to choose. We have the ability to determine who we are. That is not the case for a large portion of this country. So when I think about what the threats to democracy are, when I think about what the solution is we have to understand that what we may think of democracy, what we understand as democracy, may not be the same form of democracy that others understand. I had the opportunity to meet Senator Daniel Inouye several times, who was the main sponsor in the Senate for the Hupayurak Settlement Act. And one of the things he said one day, I worked for my tribe for years, and we were meeting with him, and he did say that it was the single biggest regret he had had in legislation because it was bad legislation. Sometimes problems do not need to be fixed. Sometimes problems need to be allowed to work themselves out.
I want to first thank you for inviting me here. It's the first time I'm at UConn speaking, and really great to be part of this community. I think it's really hard to follow. This is really profound remarks that we just heard, but I wanted to try to build on that. Maybe I will be off my notes for a little bit that what I wanted to say, because I think it's really important why we are here and what we're trying to do to having these conversations and dialogues. And in the last, nearly 3 weeks, I've been getting a lot of emails, texts, people calling me with questioning, what's the point about international law? What is the point about human rights? What's the point about rule of law and respect for humanity in all times? Why even my ex texted with my 2 kids saying, you should submit your resignation, in a way of telling me that she's very, very unhappy with and outraged by what's been going on. Yes. I'm a Palestinian. I was born and raised in Haifa, which is Israel. So I'm an Israeli citizen too. And I grew up in a place that considered me, at best, a second-class citizen. I became an American citizen in 2019. Most of the time that I worked at the ACLU in the last 19 years, I did this work not as a citizen, but as a non-citizen. Started as a visa holder, then green card, and so but my response to the questions about why we should be hold to humanity and to those principles that are so important in the darkest times is that what do we have as an alternative? What are the other options that we have? And in the light of the really serious deficit in empathy, you just heard that too, in terms of how do we deal with situations like this, I still hold to these very fundamental bedrock principles of protecting humanity at all times. But I also, for me, it's important to do that while centering those who are impacted and looking for solutions at the root causes of what led us to where we are. And I wanted to start by that because part of the problem with our international human rights framework, it has not enough focused on these 2 elements, on the people who are directly impacted including the areas that I'm not an expert with, trauma, intergenerational trauma, etc., as well as looking at the underlying causes of human rights violations rather than just reacting and putting out fires. And I can say that the recent times, including what's happened in the United States since 2020, as much as it was painful to watch and to work with families of people who were killed and murdered by the police in the United States, victims of racism and colonialism in different contexts, including in indigenous communities, as my colleagues have been working in South Dakota, from Puerto Rico, South Dakota to Alaska and Hawaii. I saw a hope that there is a shift in the way that we are addressing issues of democracy without having to disregard the centrality of these things, and particularly centering those in our human rights practice and work. So I think it's so important that we echo some of the things that were said yesterday related to truth-telling, justice, and reckoning and healing. Because without all of these, here in the United States or elsewhere, we will not be able to move on into something better for people. And I think, particularly for the United States democracy, it is built in a way it was structured. It was not structured to be an inclusive democracy. And it's still a work in progress. I'm not saying anything new to you. But many people are denying that very fact, that historic fact of the exclusion that continues, and not only that, the erasure of people's now, not only the rights to participate in the fundamental right to vote, or as you mentioned, voting rights, suppression of voting rights, disenfranchisement of millions of people in the country, but the erasure of even the ability to speak about their history, speak about their struggles, from black communities and their struggle for reparations and healing to indigenous peoples and their continuous struggle for decolonization and acceptance as sovereign nation that have a special and they have been continuing that struggle. So with that, I think that we have to think about our democracy in an imperfect but really lacking and failing to address structural and systemic racism, that we have not really done enough in reckoning with our history. And I'm saying our history, it took me a while to get used to say our, because of course I'm still a newcomer to this. But I see it from that history that I bring, my experience that I bring here. The same as I had to when I saw that people were not thinking about why is this level of violence led to attacks on civilians in southern Israel. Why could not people think about the wider collective punishment that's been going on for years on end? And how can we address this without just focusing on the moment, which is a painful, hard moment, and trying to really elevate mitigate the suffering and pain, which is what international humanitarian law does. It's really trying to, in a way, balance between military necessity and humanity. And what an equation that is. It's really very, very painful one, where we kind of accept a priori that there are some who are going to be compromised, who are going to be paying a price. And I think we have to question that. And we have to really not accept the sort of structures that and the laws that exist, and try to always seek expanding the protection of people's rights in different settings. And I think every country and every region may have different ways of doing that. And so what I want to stress to you now is that in this country we also have a greater risks for very fundamental issues, right? Like attacks on First Amendment rights. First Amendment rights, that is, coupled with the attack on voting rights, that is a sustained denial of people's experiences of exclusion and systemic racism, and an inability to hear and be driven by what they are offering to move forward. And I also think that it's not just about us here and from the rest of the world. Shareen, I know that you didn't mean just to say the people who are in the United States and citizen or non-citizen. Actually, what the American democracy and experience is having an impact on worldwide. Because the United States is not just a country that is operating in its own borders. The expansion of the United States domination, whether it's through military bases, and you can see how many military bases we have overseas, military interventions, including the illegal, unlawful use of force in violation of the UN Charter and international humanitarian law and human rights law, including our mass surveillance program that's still operating, and it's not just having an impact on people who are non-citizen. It has indirectly an impact on people who are in the United States. There are some safeguards, there are some protections, added protections for people in the United States. But we have to really recognize that. What is the role of our democracy in sending the message that we can do better in those situations, including in a time of war? What was happening now is trying to take us to a point of using anti-terrorism framework, which have led to devastation and destruction, not just for communities in the United States, particularly Muslim, Arab, Middle Eastern, and South Asian communities, but as you know, what happened post 9/11. It is important for us to understand that this is not the way to go in terms of denying the underlying causes. And I think that we have a responsibility as people who are working in the spaces of human rights, democracy, to try to do different things differently, and to try to be more open. And there are uncomfortable truths and situations that we're going to be in. And that's what is really important, including in university setting. People are not supposed to come here to be feeling that this is just a place where they're to be protected in terms of their ability. I'm not talking about safety, I'm talking about protection of their world point views and ways that you can only think in the individual way and only my way is going to be the way. You gotta have to be open to these uncomfortable realities and situations and experiences that people bring, right? And without doing that, we will not have any hope in making American democracy more inclusive, more protective of all people, without addressing what I call original sins, whether it's race, gender, and class. I want to close by one thing that I think inspires me in this moment. And I may have said things that are not within the ACLU mandate, so it will be under the category of an adjunct professor, my resort to that, so I appreciate it. But one thing I want to leave you with is Martin Luther King's speech at Riverside Church when he delivered a historic speech against the war in Vietnam. After that historic and landmark saying, I really encourage you to read it. He was attacked by even the New York Times and other liberal circles, including leaders in the civil rights movement who said, why are you interfering in this? This is not your business. Just focus on civil rights in the United States. You're making progress. Keep doing that. And he said, no, that is the moment that I had to break the silence about what was going on in Vietnam. I ask people to be led, and including my organization that doesn't have a mandate, to look at international affairs or foreign policy, that so to speak, unless there is direct U.S. involvement on the ground or strikes. Anyway, I encourage all of us to think about our democracy and our human rights as interrelated to things that are happening all over, and not just from the point of view of, it's better for us here. It's just really no one is going to be safe if everyone is not safe. We are going to have to stick to that humanity fundamental principles in order for us to move away from these atrocities that are really threatening the existence of peoples and their communities. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to come speak with you all today. I have been thinking a lot over the last few days about, what I could bring to you all and what perspective I could share, and like what I was going to say. And I've already learned so much from the three of you, and I feel such a thread between your remarks and what I've been thinking which makes me think maybe I'm on the right path. So what I want to talk a little bit about is this story that we have in America about our democracy and how it falls flat for so many of us and has fallen flat for so many of us throughout history. And then also how people just like us have come together to make it better at very important times during our history. And the context that I come to this work is election administration, voting rights, access to the ballot, how our governmental systems work, and also reproductive freedom. And I spent the first half of my career, most of my career, honestly, at Planned Parenthood, really trying to work on public health policies that were meaningful and inclusive and grounded in the idea that without bodily autonomy and civil rights, there is no economic security, there is no education security, there is no safety for your family if you don't have those two things. So I think about how the thread between that work and the really coordinated efforts and attacks to stymie people from exercising their own bodily autonomy attached to this real undermining we've seen of our election system the past 5 or 6 years. So, right, we have this story, one person, one vote, the freest and fairest in the world. That is an American narrative that we're often sold from the very beginning. Yet our government systems just aren't built to reflect this belief, from the filibuster to the Electoral College to partisan gerrymandering, which is running rampant in states across this country. Our systems really allow minority factions to overrule the majority preference. And just like Kim said, our systems are holding this idea that we're so polarized and everything is so evenly split, but that is not the reality of how it's all working. Our system of democracy is just really marred by this political inequality, and it has been since the very beginning. We face a coordinated and incredibly well-funded effort to keep it this way, to keep the political inequality within our system. And there are small, but very loud, very powerful, very well-funded right-wing forces engaged in this coordinated effort to thwart the will of the people, whether it's at the ballot box, in the courts, or through violent mobs. And the push behind this is to keep power consolidated between the wealthy white few. It is what our country was grounded on from the very beginning, and it is what the right wing is fighting to keep that power consolidated today. So to me, that is the problem. That is the most serious threat to our U.S. democracy, this coordinated right-wing effort to undermine it. The echo between our present moment and the darker aspects of our American past are not an accident and are really magnified by this carefully constructed effort that, in my experience, it goes beyond the legal movement, but that is where I do most of my work. And it is this legal movement that has been building for decades that we are seeing flourish in this moment. This distortion of our democracy and its effect to deny fundamental rights work together. There really is a direct line between the anti-majoritarian movement that ultimately overruled Roe v. Wade, which, by the way, if anyone wants to talk about how Roe v. Wade was not the answer, and the millions and millions of women and people across our country that were not protected by that case, come find me later. But there is a line between that anti-majoritarian movement and the anti-democracy efforts that we have seen over the last 5 or 6 years in our country. The link connecting election sabotage and voter suppression and restricting reproductive freedom has really been at the core of this right-wing legal movement. We see the same tactics being used in both of the movements. We're seeing over the last few years the tactics against local election clerks, school board members, and mayors that the anti-choice movement has been sharpening for years. Harassment, disinformation, bullying, intimidation, threats, and sometimes violence. They're using the same playbook. We even see the same lawyers and right-wing law firms who have used the courts to restrict access to reproductive health care, restricting access and trying to circumvent our most basic civil right, the freedom to vote for representatives of our choosing. It's the same names, the same people from the 90s who were pressing this agenda are the ones you see going across the news, are being indicted in places like Georgia and Michigan. These are the same people. And this isn't an accident. This coordinated effort to silence the voices of over half of our population, to protect agenda that does not recognize the humanity of Black and Brown and Indigenous people, of women and the LGBT community, people with disabilities, and young folks. It's not by accident. This is a plan that is coming to fruition in this moment. The whole point of democracy is collective action, right? Organizing individual power to govern the collective. Yet in our government and with these systems we've been given, we're all propping up white supremacy and misogyny and homophobia, even as we engage in this act of democracy. And it is this weakness in our system that has really allowed the right wing to burrow in and take hold. I think it's easy in this moment to point at villains, right? We have the former president. We have, loud and bullying voices in the U.S. Congress. We have the folks who are defendants in Georgia right now. It's easy to be like, oh, you're the problem. You're the problem. If we could, eliminate your voice and influence, things would be fine. And don't get me wrong, these people are meeting the moment. They are leveraging their powers in ways that perpetuate harm against vulnerable individuals and against our overall democratic systems. But these individual people are not themselves the problem. They are a reflection of the problem. And I'll say it again, it's this idea that we have a coordinated campaign to undermine our elections and then diminish our fundamental rights, not allow people to exercise their fundamental rights. And we have to hold these bad guys accountable, no doubt. We have to use the criminal, civil, legal system. We have to make complaints against their law license, because a lot of them are lawyers. But we also have to take a step back and look at the bigger picture of what democracy means for the people grappling with everyday life. And this is I think, the roadmap for the solution. It's what Kim's doing. Refer to her notes. This idea that, we each have individual and collective power to really do the traditional things, activate towards policy, use the court system, organize, shape the public narrative. And I think we do all these things to really inspire civic engagement, which is how we make change in this community, in this country, and globally. People coming together around a core set of values, and are aligned. We don't have to agree on everything, but we can agree on this core set of values. And since I've talked about all the kind of depressing right-wing movement, I just want to end with one thing. We know how to do this. We have a path. At many times during American history, people have come together across race and place and gender and class to demand a better democracy, a more inclusive democracy. From the Reconstruction Amendments that reframed liberty, to the 19th Amendment giving women the right to vote, the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, the Americans with Disability Act, the 26th Amendment. We have fought together to expand our democracy. So that's the solution. It is our individual and collective actions to come together and build a multiracial coalition that demands better, And we can build better systems. We can work within this imperfect system, and as we sort of activate and advocate for change. So thank you all for listening to my spiel.
Good morning. It's good to see you all. I'm encouraged that so many people are here because it shows me you care. You care. And I think that's one of the first places we have to start when we talk about democracy. You have to care about it. One of my friends, a coworker from the attack at the Capitol on January 6th, said one of America's biggest problems is we are so indifferent about things. We don't care about things until it affects us. And you just think about that for a moment. I get really frustrated when I talk. I don't like to prepare speeches and notes and things like that. I like to just talk off the cuff. So if I come off a little blunt and a little crash and direct, forgive me, but I believe that that's what's needed in this moment. The world is literally on fire right now, and we don't have time to try to fan out the flames. We need full fire extinguishers on these fires that are going on around the world right now. A form of government of the people, by the people, for the people, all these wonderful speakers alluded to so many problems that are going on, with Kim talking about the gun violence, or the amount of people that support gun reform, the amount of people that support a woman's right to choose. They don't match what's happening with the laws that are being made. The access to voting, the people, it's not adding up. The people that are making the laws are not in touch with the individuals whose lives they are affecting. How do we fix that? One, you care. Then you have to learn how democracy is supposed to work. This isn't anything new that we are experiencing here. When they said that long time ago, you may have heard that I hold these truths to be self-evident, that what? All men are created equal. But who did that leave out? Women, black people, people of color. At that time, we were looked at as property. So people still going around quoting that, believing that. One of my main takeaways from January 6th, those individuals who were there that committed those acts, they thought that they were right. They thought they still do. The former president, to this day, denies that he did anything wrong. So that leads to the question, what is the biggest threat to this democracy? And there's several, but I have a friend of mine who was recently promoted in the Maryland court system, and I went to his investiture. I believe that's the right word for it. And I don't usually get to go to those things, but it was really a great experience. And he said that when people come into his courtroom, they have three things. People want to be seen, they want to be heard, and they want to be respected. Even the individuals on January 6th, a lot of them were driven to commit what they did that day because they didn't feel like they were heard. They were saying, now, I am not excusing it at all, what they did. But I do think that we, as a collective, and this we talk about the humanity, we don't see people. We don't, even if their views are completely on the total opposite end of the spectrum as ours, we don't see people, we don't hear people. We are so focused, we're indifferent, right? We're indifferent. we don't care about a woman's right to choose if we don't have a woman in our life that it doesn't affect. I'm not a woman, I don't care, whatever. That's what, but you chuckle, but that's kind of like the thinking of people. I have the right to vote, I'm good. We're our own worst enemy. When I started with the Capitol Police almost 16 years ago, all I cared about was the nice paycheck. You know, it was a nice steady income. You know, I job security working for the government. But as I engaged and grew up and started to see the things that affected my life, seeing people come up to the Capitol protesting various events, one of the biggest things that stands out in my mind was the Obamacare when it was passed. It was a Saturday afternoon, which was rare because Congress isn't in session on a Saturday. They came in, and there were so many people out there saying, do not pass this Obamacare, do not pass it. That was the majority of the crowd. And there was this one individual there, 19-year-old kid, and he's standing in this mouth of 400 or 500 people screaming, don't pass it. And he's like, please pass it. And people are beating up on this kid and, you know, you lazy bum, why should we have to pay for your health care and blah, 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 blah. And he's saying, they're saying, get a job, get a job. You're like, I have a job. I work at Subway. My employer won't give me 40 hours so I can become full-time, so I can't have health insurance. What more? I want to work. You got a job for me? And like the face, and that goes back to the dialogue we were talking. The look on those individuals' faces, like they were taken aback. And I was surprised because you have seen these bloodsuckers at these protests. They are relentless and they're their way or the highway, but they actually had a moment of empathy, what it appeared to be empathy for this individual. And some people talked to him offline, but that was a great moment that people don't get to see that. People didn't understand that guy's story. They just thought it was just some lazy guy. Or people think that women getting abortions are just because they're fast and they just don't want to use protection. It could be the furthest thing from the truth. So the dialogue portion is really important. Like I said, I can go on and on and on. And I do. In the book that I wrote, I do go on and on and on about it. But we gotta care. We gotta care more. And I'll leave it with this. What can we do? On January 6th, the police officers were overrun. We were getting the crap kicked out of us, and we were begging for help. Over time, we were able to repel off the attackers, and the Capitol went back to a little bit of normalcy. Now, how did we gain the upper hand? We didn't have a magic smoke bomb. It wasn't some nice command that we gave that they said, oh yeah, maybe we should leave. No. What happened? People showed up. Good guys showed up, and the good guys won. It's like tug of war. We're pulling on this rope, and we're getting close to that edge of losing democracy. And the other side is pulling hard. But we get more and more people on the back of our rope pulling. The good guys are going to win. We just need more people on the back of our rope helping everybody fight and stand up for what is right. So I'm just going to leave it with that kind of cool analogy.
I want to thank our panelists because this is an extraordinary synergy, and I agree there's a through line. And I would like to pose one question to each of you because there are so many students and so many community members, to give us one example in your practice of one of the most hopeful and strategic interventions you've seen that could be conceivably taken out and replicated. What is a hopeful example of what we can do?
Sure, I'll start. So there was some work that we did with parents in West Virginia. And, it was around providing, this idea around providing universal pre-K in this community, and there was lots and lots of conversations about why it should not happen. Some of the things that we've heard around indoctrination of children, or, is your kid, it should be your responsibility. And then we just kind of brought everybody together and really started talking about what it would mean if these kids, if these like 4-year-olds have access to universal pre-K, right? Without it being a cost burden for families. And once those conversations started to happen, there was this realization that even the folks that were like, no, would benefit from it. And so that community ended up moving forward with this universal pre-K. And, the thing that we all know, not only does it make it easier for parents in terms of childcare for their kids, right? But it could also improve educational outcomes for young folk. And so just bringing folks together, having those conversations, having a plan, an action plan that was going to work for folks in the community, and then providing coaching around, okay, this is how we're going to put that in place, made all the difference.
The most hopeful thing I have seen has been when people actually just listen to each other. Back home, there was a massacre in 1862 which almost completely obliterated the Wiyot people of Humboldt Bay. They were killed at the physical and spiritual center of their world. They were reduced to under a few hundred people. It's an island in the middle of the bay, and over time it fell into the hands of farmers and eventually into the hands of the city of Eureka. And there had always been a long argument over access. Could they go to, imagine being denied the ability to go to your place of worship, the place that means the most to you, that is so central to your identity, and you cannot go there. That's a case for a lot of people in this world, by the way. Over time, we all know the story because we all grew up there. Over time, as the story kept getting told and we talked more, everyone always shows up and says, what can I do to help? And the response is generally the same. Could you just not do nothing and listen? Everyone wants to do something. Sometimes doing nothing is the better thing. Well, what happened one night is the chair of the Wiyot tribe picked the phone up and cold called the brand new mayor of the city of Eureka. Hi, how are you? Da-da-da. And the mayor finally goes, well, what do you want? She's like, I want the island back. Not a big request. They got it back because people started listening to each other, stopped pointing fingers at each other, stopped blaming people who had nothing to do with an event over 100 years ago. And the city, over a series of years, transferred all of its holdings back, and it is, to our knowledge, the first time a local municipality has returned in full its holdings to a native group. And that is beginning to spread throughout the county. There are more and more organizations who are transferring their lands back to the tribe, saying, we know what happened, and this is the only way we know how to move us forward. And there's not a dialogue of you're taking something. There's not a dialogue of you don't deserve this. There's a dialogue of how do we move forward together? So there's hope if we just take a little bit of time and listen.
So I would like to share, just building on what I said, the centering of directly impacted people, communities, as well as addressing root causes. So since 2020 and after the murder of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter protests and uprisings, we have come together with, that is the ACLU and the US Human Rights Network, and also Professor Gay McDougall, and we were thinking about what do we do in order to bring international human rights accountability, what was happening in the US. It wasn't just what happened in the summer of 2020, it was looking at some of the history of that. And I think that what we were able to do was really something that moved, and at least my role or ACLU role was as an allied organization, supportive of the work that's been going on. It's not something that we have invented or created. It was to really connect between international system that does a lot of important things, but usually it's disconnected with directly impacted folks. And what we did was the calling on behalf and working with victims of police violence, calling for an independent commission of inquiry that first we wanted to look at the United States. Never asked, like since maybe the 50s, late 40s, the 50s, there were some demands for such commission of inquiry looking at, anti-black racism, lynching, and racial segregation in the South, in particular in the South. But it was really a building on of that history. We said, oh, it's important for the U.S. to be held accountable to the same standards that it's preaching around the world, even though it's not the same atrocities that you see other countries engaged in around the world. But put it really in perspective over a period of centuries, what has been happening to black people and the enslaved black people, and how we got to this point. We had to put that really great demand. We couldn't get the Commission of Inquiry focused only in the United States because there was a pressure from mostly former colonial powers that came to the U.S. To help U.S. under Trump administration. But we were able to get, because of this coalition, of now over 100 organizations, mostly black-led organizations, that are UN, it's called the UN Anti-Racism Coalition. We were able to create and push the Human Rights Council to create a new human rights mechanism that's focusing on the rights of people of African descent and Africans, and not only looking at police violence and law enforcement, but looking at the root causes. Specifically, the resolution says looking at the transatlantic slave trade and colonialism as the root causes for that, and looking at systemic racism and addressing broader issues. This mechanism started working in the last 2 years. It just visited the US in April, May, and submitted its report to the Human Rights Council, and they will be going to Brazil in December. I know it sounds like, oh, it's another report, another mechanism, but what's important about it is that they're centering directly impacted communities, and they're people who are speaking directly to power, people who are speaking about their experiences and demanding change and structural transformative change, and they're putting it in the historical perspective so that they can elevate the reparations movement, they can elevate the issues that we are hearing about, and linking between international human rights and accountability for human rights to the very local, national level. I think that is a model that now helped other, by the way, at the Human Rights Council, since we had called for that centering directly impacted. When the council was dealing with the Ukraine situation, they had a person from a civilian or from Ukraine at the podium, just as they did with George Floyd's brother during COVID. We couldn't get him to Geneva, but he spoke as one of the speakers at the podium. They did that also in the context of the Palestine Commission of Inquiry, and this will be having impact on other situations. So I think that is a model that helps close the gaps that we see between, the human rights, it's out there and it's not really connected to the grassroots organizing and the lived experience of people and communities.
There are so many things that give me hope in this work. And I think just one very small, simple example is, in 2020 and in the November elections in 2020 and 2022, the communities and the places that were targeted for election disruption and voter suppression, a tactic that really helped kind of take the wind out of that is just the community celebrating and the community coming together around voter registration drives or polling places or early vote collection, and having music and food and being together and really showing the kind of celebratory aspect of what it means to lift your voice on behalf of your community. And it sounds small and silly, but it really worked. It works to kind of diminish the very loud, very scary voice of the minority that's what it's trying to do, is intimidate people. And turns out celebration is a great antidote to that.
I'll go back to yesterday, to something that gives me hope. We're all familiar with the tragedy that happened in Maine. Last night, I don't know if you saw Congressman Jared Golden, who represents Maine, who's a Democrat, who was against banning assault rifles, admitted on national TV that he was wrong and that he wants to work with Congress to ban assault rifles now. A lot of people criticizing him, now that it finally is at your front door, now you want to do something about it. That may be true, but it's a step in the right direction. And that gave me a little bit of hope, because one thing, like I just said, people don't care until it affects them. Well, it will affect you. It will. It's coming. Whether it's gun violence or access to it's going to come. It's going to come. We need to be ready for it when it comes. Meet that moment, and it's not. People don't need to politicize these things, shootings and everybody. But you can't help it, because political policies are causing some of these events that are happening. But that gave me a little bit of hope to see Congressman Golden admit, one, that he was wrong, because that doesn't happen in this day and age. Nobody's ever wrong. And two, that he wanted to do something about it, not just say sorry. So that gave me a little bit of hope.
I'm going to abuse the chair's prerogative for one more moment, because we promised we'd give you time at about 10:25, but we have a few more moments. And so I'd like also to ask you, it's really difficult. I work on economic rights, and this is the poor stepsister in the conversation around human rights within traditionally human rights discourse and practice. And yet so many of the themes, whether it's childcare or health care or access to decent health for women, so many of the themes that you've hit upon, land rights, land access, employment, equal opportunity, have this economic rights undertone. And yet in the United States, we haven't ratified the International Covenant on Economic and Social and Cultural Rights. We've ratified other conventions that can help us around racial discrimination, et cetera. How, in the absence of those ratifications, can people in the United States take action explicitly framing some of these questions in economic rights terms?
One of the things that came to mind for me, and Nicole will get this, and it actually goes back to my work in reproductive health, is the reproductive justice movement, which was a movement that was led by Black women, and it really looked at this whole idea around around reproductive rights, and realized that there were so many things that was missing. And one of it was this idea around economic justice, because the right to decide whether or not to have a child also depends upon an individual deciding, okay, I have the economic right, the economic circumstances to raise that child in the way that I want to. And I really think, kind of like thinking about justice movements and understanding, okay, what is the economic underpinnings that we need in order to move whatever their thing is forward, and how does that contribute to whether or not someone is actually able to lean into that right or not, because if you don't have the economic resources to do the thing that you want to do, then it becomes moot, right? So I think really thinking about and taking taking hints from the justice movements, particularly around reproductive justice, I think is a way forward.
Yeah, you can do this real fast. I'm going to attack this two ways real fast. One is, if you think about Native people in this country, professor of Native American Studies, I sort of have to do this, is who's responsible for Native people in this country? The Bureau of Indian Affairs, which is housed in the Department of the Interior. Fish, horses, trees, water. We have to stop being seen as a natural resource. I was born in Pine Ridge, South Dakota. The average income there is around $5,000 a year. The life expectancy for a Native American male on that reservation is 48 years. We have to do something. We have to start seeing Native people as people. The other thing is, we've set the system up in such a way that you can't advance without going into incredible economic debt. You're all here. There are a lot of students here. I'm assuming you're here because you want to be here, not because you're required to be here. So we'll just pretend you're all here because you want to be here. That's good. You can't advance in this society unless you put your economic livelihood at risk. That's the truth about it. And you've probably all seen your financial aid packages. You probably have all seen the little notices that bills are going to be coming due. We have to fix this.
I would just add very quickly to that. I agree with those comments. I think that in the United States, it's really interesting. If you talk about challenging or questioning capitalist systems and structures, you immediately are like, oh, you're socialist, you're communist, and things like that. There's no real understanding of that, really how this country was built, on the back of whom, and where is it going, and the level of exploitation. Even if it's not the government doing that, there's also the other element I would add to that, is the corporations and the private sectors, and the level of exploitation is happening, facilitated by laws and policies of the government oftentimes, is being overlooked. And under international human rights law, there's no human rights obligations over corporations per se or directly. They have human rights responsibilities. The real obligations really lays on the government's actors at all levels, that they have to ensure that these corporations are protecting human rights of people, whether it's in workplaces, whether it's in the extraction, industries and what have you. So I think it's really important to think about the root causes to these things. Why were we not part of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights? I mean, it was President Carter who actually signed the treaty, and there's no action, nothing. It didn't go anywhere from there. That was late 70s. And yet we can do some progress even if we did not ratify the covenant, and it will not be anytime soon, I can assure you. I'm not trying to discourage you, but because of the political system and the way that we accept or take on human rights implementation domestically. So economic justice is a key area that we need to, because without economic justice, social economic rights, how are you expecting people to exercise their other rights that are protected under the Bill of Rights? Whether it's from the right to free speech, association, religious freedom, to other equality issues. So they are so intrinsically linked and related. And that's where I think we can make more progress. Even if it's not coming from the federal government, from the top, from the Senate or the House, it can be done. And there are some organizations and movements and communities pushing for that.